Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Daily Dose of History, the only place you need to visit each day to satisfy your daily dose of history. In today's episode, we will be talking about a very interesting topic, the space race. Specifically, how did the US manage to win the space race, even though the Soviets had a substantial lead in the beginning? Well, in today's episode, we will be discussing this in detail. In the 20th century, after the end of World War II, a new conflict arose between the two standing superpowers at the time, the capitalistic United States and its allies and Communist Soviet Union. This conflict is known as the Cold War. It was a clash of ideologies to show which political system was superior in terms of technology, military power, and in turn, it would show which economic political system was better. Space became the next logical arena to compete in, because in Earth they were already competing in the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and other conflicts. At the beginning of the space race, the Soviets had the lead, as they had accomplished seemingly every possible milestone in space first. Unfortunately, for the Soviets, the United States was able to win the space race against all means because of extensive funding from the government and some Soviet shortcomings. So why did the USSR have such an enormous lead in the beginning of the space race? After World War II, both the US and the USSR gathered German rocket engineers and took them in to reveal their expertise in rocket technology. The German engineers would serve as an accelerator to creating rockets. The technology that was used in the German V-2 rockets would be replicated by both sides, but the Soviets had the upper hand because they had Sergei Korolev, a leading engineer that was well experienced with rocket propulsion systems. In 1946, Korolev was assigned to the Soviet rocket program to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the United States. By 1947, they were able to recreate the V-2 rockets by creating the R-1 rocket. They followed on with the project, and by 1947, they had created an intercontinental ballistic missile with their seventh generation of the rocket known as the R-7 rocket. The R-7 rocket was a two-stage rocket with a maximum range of 7,000 kilometers and a payload of 5.4 tons, enough to carry a Soviet nuclear bomb from St. Petersburg to New York City. When Korolev found out that the US was planning to spend millions on launching a satellite into orbit, the Soviets within a month planned and launched Sputnik 1, the first satellite in Earth's orbit. After this, Korolev further modified the R-7 rocket so that the sole purpose of the rocket was to go to space. With this rocket, they could send a free human into orbit and have him do a spacewalk. With all of this in mind, you would think, how did the Soviets lose the space race when they had such a large lead to the United States? Well, one of the shortcomings of the Soviet space program was that they did not have much support from the government. They were more interested in the military aspect of the project, while Korolev wanted to reach the moon and later Mars. The efforts of Korolev didn't really work because at one point his competitors got the support from government officials and were forced to invest in two projects at the same time with the little budget that they had. The Soviets were expecting to go to the moon by 1967 with the Soyuz 1 program. Unfortunately, Korolev entered the hospital on January 5, 1966, and 9 days later he died of cancer. From then on, the Soviet space program was doomed. Most of the government officials were not in favor of the space program and were only interested in intercontinental ballistic missiles. Vasily Mishin was chosen as Korolev's successor, and things did not play out as planned. The Soviets were still on the goal of reaching the moon in 1967. With the increased pressure, Mishin launched the Soyuz 1, even though engineers detected more than 203 design faults. The rocket crashed, marking the first in-flight fatality of any space program. From then on, four more Soyuz planes failed. The Soviets were unable to reach the moon even after the 1967 deadline. Another reason the Soviets were unable to win the space race to the moon was that the United States had further and extensive funding from the American government towards their space program called NASA, which gave the US a huge advantage when it came to resources for funding research and manned missions. The data shows that NASA spent about $23 billion on manned programs from 1961 through the first lunar landing in July 1969. In the Mercury program, they spent 4 billion, in Gemini 1.3 billion, and Apollo 21.3 billion. Estimates from the Soviet manned program range from 4.8 billion to 10.1 billion, or less than 50% of NASA's budget, which is a huge loss in revenue when it comes to funding for the space program, which is a very economically demanding program. The data also shows that the United States was lagging from the USSR when it came to manned space missions and hours spent in space from 1961 to 1965, as they were catching up to the Soviet Union's lead. From then on, the US took the lead, and in 1969 they landed the first human on the moon with the Apollo 11 mission. Funding from the American government towards the NASA program and other programs was key to the success of the United States, as the Soviet Union did not have as many resources as the US to spend on the space race. At the beginning of the space race, the Soviets had the lead because they had Sergei Korolev, the mastermind behind the Soviet space program. After President John F. Kennedy declared in 1961 that America would reach the moon within a decade, and the further funding that the government gave the space program to ensure the future of America as the world leader in technology. The US managed to outpace the Soviet space program and consequently win the space race to the moon. Thank you everybody for tuning in and hearing this episode of Your Daily Dose of History. Tune in tomorrow for another episode. See you.